Hi everybody, Matt here from Matt Likes Comics. It's been a while since I've done a video like this. About a little over a month or two, I guess. I don't remember exactly. I don't really keep track of when, like, I did this, I remember the videos I make because of the notes I keep, but I don't remember necessarily what days they air because things get flipped around a lot. So, welcome to my Unrant video this time, wearing my Nefarious comic shirt. This time I'm going to rant about what I love and why I love comic books. When I was 5 years old, I discovered comic books, and what got me into it was a bunch of Silver Age DC books that were my uncle's that my dad was keeping at the house. I liked the bright colors. One of the books that I fell in love with, the first one I remember reading, was Adventure Comics 351. It had a giant replica of, oh my God, that on the cover with Colossal Boy standing next to it, Superboy's flying, going around picking up garbage for whatever reason, and there were other members of the Legion that were tiny in comparison to those. And what caught my eye, my 5-year-old eye, was the colors and the heroes. I knew who Superman was. I didn't know that there was a Superboy at the time. This was the first time I discovered that there was a Superboy to go with Superman. And it was around this time, of course, I discovered Supergirl while flipping through all these books. I may have not understood the stories as much then, but what captivated me was the art, because a lot of them were drawn by the very great Kurt Swan, who to this day remains my favorite artist of all time. But the colors and the fluidity and the beautiful pictures inside. These weren't pictures that me and my compatriots were doing at school, where we were, using our fingers and finger painting or drawing really bad, pictures of our faces or whatever, kids being kids, right? This was professionally done work that looked really good. I also realized I knew a lot of the words that I was reading, because admittedly, I read at a higher level than I was right from the start. I learned how to read early, like before I even went to kindergarten. I could read, and so I was flabbergasted that these were these books that had colored pictures with these cool words, and that I could understand what was going on. So I kept flipping through them. Then, when I became 7, 8, 9 years old and started getting my own money, when I wasn't wasting them on hockey cards or, toys, I was buying comic books of my own. And the comic books I was buying were mostly Superman, Batman, the odd, I didn't buy Marvel Comics, but I would be given Marvel Comics by relatives or friends that didn't know any better, in the sense that, oh, he likes this. I read Star Wars. I also discovered newspaper comics, as when I realized, like, I caught my dad reading them one day, and so I discovered newspaper comics, which I also became a big fan of. In fact, newspaper comics probably are the reason I tell 8,000 dad jokes a day now, because it was gag a day strips that I sort of cut my teeth on. Plus, my father actually had a big collection of, I don't know if you remember, but in the late 60s, early 70s, they did a lot of, sold a lot of books, like just small paperbacks with things like BC, or Wizard of Id, comic strips, per page or whatever. Or what else? Who else did he have? He had Tumbleweeds, Ziggy, that kind of stuff, with the gag a day strips being reprinted in a little collection. He had a bunch of those, so I'd flip through those as well once I understood that they were newspaper strips. Also, though, I started reading Mad Magazine because, again, Mad Magazine was a bigger book. It felt a little more adult reading Mad because it was covering topical um, things like, Spear. I would have never known who Spiro Agnew was if it wasn't for Mad Comics. I wouldn't have known who Richard Nixon was. That was before my time, but when I was 8, 9 buying Mad books, they were still making tons of Richard Nixon Watergate jokes. So I got to learn a little bit about current events that way, and it sort of piqued my interest into that. But the comic books, to me, were something that I loved right instinctively right off the bat. And I would read them. I was a lonely child. I didn't have a lot of friends. I mean, a lot of people out there know that. I was bullied a lot because honestly, I was an arrogant little ass when I was younger. I'm still an arrogant ass, according to some people. But I was an arrogant little kid, and people didn't like it. I was like, I'm smarter than you, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So I didn't have many friends, and I spent a lot of time on my own in my room reading comic books. Star Wars came out in 77, and that was added to it. Superman the movie, it made me more and more. I just was buying and looking at this stuff. I got my first taste of the Fantastic Four from the TV show. I was watching that TV show, and it took me a year to realize that the robot wasn't in the comic books, and that it was a guy with a flaming, body who was really in it. Once I got that part, well, I was hooked on that, and the Fantastic Four for the longest time was the only Marvel that I would read for a bit. By the way, the newspaper strip for Spider-Man is the reason why I'm not a big Spider-Man fan. I thought the strip was kind of boring, so I didn't bother reading the comic books. Maybe that was bad of me or whatever, but I got better. I've read Spider-Man since. But that initial love of the form stuck with me for a long time, like 54 years, which is where I'm at now. My tastes have changed, but I have never stopped loving Superman, Supergirl, Lois Lane, the Legion, all the stuff that I fell in love with the first time. And I have expanded upon that. And one of the reasons that comics has kept me happy as an adult, why I like comic books, is as I got older, I discovered other genre. Because when I was a kid, all I focused on comic books. Oh, must be superheroes. My sisters started reading Gold Key ones. And as a result, I got exposed to the cartoon Gold Key ones. But I always, as a kid, looked down on them as not real comic books because they were cartoon characters to begin with. To me, they were more extensions of the comic strips that you saw in the newspapers than they were actual comic books. Well, I got over that. But so I didn't really collect them that way. Basically, to me, comics were Mad Magazine, Crack Magazine, and superheroes. When I was about 12 or so, a friend of mine finally convinced me, start reading some of these Marvel books. You might like some of the stories. So I started with the Avengers. I picked up my love of the Fantastic Four again. But I started reading some Avengers, and some of the characters were neat. I liked the Scarlet Witch. I liked, this was the period when it was the Scarlet Witch, Captain Marvel, Captain America, Star Fox, Hawkeye, these things. And my friend, when he was describing to me Marvel, he was telling me, like, this guy is like this guy, Hawkeye's like Green Arrow, da-da-da. He's like Batman, he's like this, he's like that, so forth. Actually, I find that there's no real Marvel equivalent to Batman. That's one guy DC seems to have as his own. Superman, you can go Thor, you can go Hulk. Like, there are people that have the same types of things, but Batman is pretty unique in DC. Write that under insight. Now, So I got into that. And at the same time, that's when I realized, hey, maybe these Gold Key comics are cool comics. This, of course, was the time that Gold Key was only became Whitman and was only available in the bags. So I never saw Gold Key on the shelf that I was paying attention to. But I did notice there were comics like Richie Rich and Archie, stuff that I had seen over the years. I mean, I had another uncle, not the same uncle, who was really into Archie books. And so I was reading Archie's, like he liked the digest, but he also bought the odd floppy. But he really had the digest. So when I get to my grandmother's house where he was living at the time, he's not that much older than me. So he was still living at home for a while when I, right into my teens. So I read his digest when I'd go over and all that stuff. And I got an appreciation for the Archie books then. But so I started buying my own digest once in a while. But with the fun purchases back then were the digests from DC. My dad would buy those monthly. We had a good collection of those. And that was cool when I discovered comic shops, because when I discovered comic shops, my love expanded because I got to see all these books I would have never seen at the newsstand, because this was, of course, was the 80s when all the black and whites were coming out. Aircell was out there. Coleco, First Comics, all these other new ones were coming out, and it was like, wow. Plus, of course, quarter bins and 50-cent bins for older comics. I've got so many Bronze Age books, Superman ones from the 50-cent bins they had back then. I fell in love with DC Comics Presents because it was Superman, and because I'd already known about Brave and the Bold. Each discovery made me love comics that much more. Each discovery felt like, even though it was there, and of course I discovered the Overstreet Price Guide. So I was like able to flip through this book. I bought my first price guide. I'm like, oh my God, look at all these old covers. And it opened a love for comic history in me, because I would read the stories in the Overstreet. Like, by the stories, I mean like the articles that talked about, here's an interview with Neil Adams. Here's an interview with the guy who created the Phantom back in da-da-da-da. Like, it was all, wow, cool. And of course, in the 80s, a lot of these guys were still alive. So there was more, there was a chance you could read interviews and things like this with them back then. There was no internet. I went to my first little convention. I went to my first ever comic convention, which was a small show at the Talisman Hotel, which doesn't exist anymore, in Ottawa, Canada. And I went there with $3.55 in my pocket. Well, I left there with a nickel and a stack of books about this big, because there was one guy there selling 10 cents. He had a dime box. And in the dime box, it was mostly things like Richie Rich and Archie, but I still got a bunch of stuff, and I learned, and my world expanded. And what I loved about that was I finally got to learn about different forms and all that stuff. Now, my entire collecting career right to this day, superheroes are number one. Always have been, always will be. I have flirted with other types. I do like horror books. I do like romance books. That just happened to be there. I didn't put that there on purpose. I like that sort of stuff. But first and foremost, if it's a superhero, I'll read it first. And that's usually how I do it today as well. But I'm grateful for having my eyes open to all the different types of stuff there is out there. What I love most about comic books, the story is leading up to something, is when you crack a book that you've never read before, you don't know what to expect. Even if you've read, even me, to this day, I've read thousands of Superman stories, because there are thousands of books. And if you don't believe me, Action Comics itself is over 1,000 books. Superman is over 900. So add them together, and you get 1,900 just there. Throw in DC Comics, et cetera, et cetera. So I've read thousands of Superman books. But every month, when the new Superman or Action comes out, I haven't read it. It's a new mystery to me. What's going to happen? Even today, especially, the covers don't give away the story like they did back in the Silver Age and Bronze Age and Golden Age was the same. You'd get like a cover of Superman with a tank on the cover, but there'd be no tank stories inside. So Golden Age and Modern Age have that in common, that the cover doesn't necessarily tell you what's in the book. But you crack that book, and I don't know about you, but I anticipate. I like to believe that each book will be good, as opposed to, oh, this will be garbage. A lot of people today think, oh, it's a modern book, it's probably garbage. And granted, they have a valid point. I do get disappointed at times by what I read. But then a book like Ordained comes along, and it's just a pleasure to read over and over. I want to thank Chonko and Dope and Comic Showcase for opening my eyes about Ordained. Um, as an example, that's something, by the way, that I didn't have back then. I'd have my friends recommend books, but now I have people from all across the world recommending books for me. I think that's awesome. International editions have opened my eyes. The fact that there's different versions of the same book in different languages. Loved it. I guess this has just been a complicated way to say I love comic books. I pretty much love everything about comic books. The worlds and universes I escape to, because really comic books are escapism. It's entertainment. But most people like me, when you were a kid and you were having difficult times, you would go inside yourself and get into the comic books, right? They were a great gateway to another world where you're not being beat up or whatever the case may be. They were a lot of fun. And that wonder of comic books is what I've loved my entire life and what I will love probably till the day I die. And if it's possible, I hope there's comic books wherever my soul, if there's, may end up wherever it ends up. I hope there's comic books, even if I have to read Ziggy all day. If you like this comic book video in terms of what I put together, oh God, I lost my mind for a second there. If you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe below. In particular, comment what you love about comic books. To me, it can be summed up: art, story, escape, all fun. And relatively cheap. At least the new comics are still, for $6 or whatever it is these days, it's still cheap entertainment compared to what even going to the movies now is like $30. So, and you can reread it over and over. So, it has its advantages still. I love comic books so much. I'm glad to have the channel. I'm glad to be able to talk to everybody here, or talk with everybody is more like it. I don't like to talk to people. Although I've been told in my arrogance that I talk to people. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please tell me in the comments what you like about comic books. My name is Matt. I like comics, and I hope you do too. Bye, everybody.